So I'm 18 now, and about 2 months ago, I moved out of my parents' house. Not to college, not to some exciting new city, just to a tiny rented room above a laundromat 15 minutes away, because I genuinely could not stay there one more day. I want to tell this whole story because I've been sitting on it for a while, and honestly, typing it out is the closest thing I have to therapy right now, since actual therapy is expensive, and my parents would probably find a way to listen in on that too. Let me back up. I'm the only kid. My mom and dad both grew up pretty strict themselves, and I think somewhere along the way they decided that raising me meant knowing absolutely everything about my life all the time, no exceptions. When I was little, this just looked like normal parenting. Curfews, checking my homework, that kind of thing. But as I got older, it never loosened up. If anything, it got tighter, like they were trying to keep a grip on something that kept slipping. By the time I was 15, my mom had my phone password memorized and would go through my messages whenever she felt like it. Not because she found something suspicious, just as a habit like checking the mail. If I asked for privacy, she'd say something like, I gave birth to you, I don't need permission to look at your life. My dad was quieter about it, but somehow worse in a way, because he'd use money and guilt instead of just taking my phone. He paid for everything. My clothes, my school stuff, my part-time job was basically pocket change compared to what he covered, and he never let me forget it. Every disagreement eventually turned into a version of, after everything I've done for you. I used to think this was just how strict parents were. I told myself a lot of my friends had strict parents too, but there's a difference between strict and what my house actually was, and it took me a long time to see that difference clearly. The thing about controlling parents, at least in my experience, is that it's never really about one big rule. It's 1,000 small things stacked on top of each other until you can't breathe. It's not being allowed to close your bedroom door all the way. It's your mom reading your diary and then bringing up something from it during a fight 3 weeks later, so you know she's still reading it. It's your dad deciding which friends you're allowed to see based on whether their parents vote the same way he does, then acting confused when you say that's unfair. It's being told what to study, what to wear to family events, who you're allowed to date, and then being told that if you disagree with any of it, you're ungrateful, or you're going through a phase, or you've been influenced by bad people. I want to be fair here because I know how these stories usually get read. My parents were not monsters in some cartoonish sense. They never hit me. They fed me, they showed up to my school events, and if you met them at a barbecue, you would think they were lovely, warm people. Genuinely, because in public, that's exactly how they act. That's actually part of what made it so hard to explain to anyone. When I tried to tell friends what home was like, it sounded small and petty out loud. My mom reads my texts. My dad controls my social life. People would kind of shrug and say, yeah, my parents are like that too, and I'd feel crazy for thinking it was worse than that. But it wasn't just the rules. It was the way they talked to me when I pushed back. If I ever tried to set a boundary, even a small one, it turned into this whole production. My mom would cry and say she felt like a failure as a mother, and somehow within 10 minutes I'd be the one apologizing to her for hurting her feelings, even though I was the one who'd started the conversation trying to explain that I needed more privacy. My dad had this other move where he'd go completely cold and silent for days if I disagreed with him about something, not yelling, just this heavy, freezing silence that filled the whole house. And I'd find myself doing anything to fix it, apologizing for things I didn't even think I'd done wrong, just to make the temperature in the house go back to normal. Looking back, I think that's the part that messed with my head the most. Not the rules themselves, but the way every attempt to set a boundary got twisted into me being the problem. I started to genuinely doubt my own perception of things. I'd have this clear memory of, say, my mom reading my private messages out loud to my dad at dinner as a joke, and then later she'd say that never happened, that I was remembering it wrong, that I was too sensitive, that I always twisted things to make her look bad. After enough years of that, you stop trusting your own memory. You start narrating your own life in your head, using their words instead of yours. There was a specific moment that I think was the real turning point, even though it doesn't sound huge when I say it out loud. Last year, I was 17, and I'd started talking to a guy from my part-time job. Nothing serious, we were just texting, getting to know each other. My mom found the messages, obviously, because she always found everything, and instead of talking to me about it like an adult, she screenshotted a bunch of them and sent them to my dad while I was at school. When I got home that day, both of them were sitting at the kitchen table waiting for me, like I was walking into an intervention. They'd printed some of the messages out. My dad had actual printed paper with our conversation on it, highlighted in places. They told me I wasn't allowed to see him anymore. Fine, I could have accepted a rule like that, even if I disagreed with it. What broke something in me was the reasoning. My dad said, and I remember this word for word because it's carved into my brain at this point, you don't get a say in this until you're paying your own bills. As long as you live under my roof, your decisions are my decisions. My mom added that she read the messages because it was her right as my mother to know everything happening in my life, and that privacy was something you earn, not something you're owed, and apparently I hadn't earned it yet, at 17 years old, after doing well in school my whole life and never actually giving them a real reason not to trust me. I remember going up to my room that night and just sitting on the floor with my back against the door because for some reason that felt safer than sitting on the bed, and thinking very clearly, this is not going to get better. This is not a phase they're going to grow out of. This is the system. This is how it's always going to work here, and it's only going to be harder to leave the older I get and the more entangled our lives become. So I started planning, quietly, because if they'd known I was planning to leave, they would have found a way to make it impossible, either through guilt or by tightening the rules even further, or honestly, I wouldn't have put it past my dad to threaten to stop paying for my last year of school just to keep me compliant. I picked up more shifts at my job. I opened a bank account they didn't know about, using my grandmother's address so the statements wouldn't come to the house. I started quietly asking around about cheap rooms for rent, the kind where you don't need a cosigner if you can show a few months of steady income. It took about 8 months of saving before I had enough for a deposit, and a couple months of rent as a buffer. 8 months of smiling at dinner, 8 months of letting my mom check my phone without flinching so she wouldn't get suspicious, 8 months of biting my tongue during my dad's cold silences, instead of trying to argue my way out of them like I used to. It was exhausting in a way I don't think I can fully explain, performing normalcy every single day while secretly building an exit. I turned 18 2 months ago. I didn't tell them what that meant to me. Obviously, I just let them think it was a regular birthday, cake, a couple of small gifts, my mom crying a little because her baby was growing up, which honestly felt almost funny given everything if it wasn't so sad. 3 weeks after my birthday, I'd finished signing the lease on the little room above the laundromat. First and last month's rent paid, and I packed what I could fit into 2 suitcases and a few boxes while they were both at work. I left a letter on the kitchen table. Not dramatic, not a huge list of grievances, just something short explaining that I loved them but I needed space to become my own person, that I wasn't running away in some reckless sense. I had a job, I had a place to live, I was safe, and that I'd reach out when I was ready. I turned my phone off before I left because I knew if I left it on, I would spend the entire day getting calls and texts that would either guilt me into turning around or completely wreck my nerve. When I turned my phone back on that night, there were 43 missed calls between the two of them, and voicemails ranging from panicked to furious to, by the end, almost pleading. My dad's last voicemail was him saying that if I walked out like this, I shouldn't expect to come back, that this would be a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life, that ungrateful children like me end up alone. My mom's messages were different. More of the crying, the how could you do this to me, the I gave up my whole life for you and this is how you repay me. Reading those back, even now, still makes my stomach twist a little because some small part of me was raised to believe that disappointing them is basically the worst thing a person can do. But I didn't go back. I sat in that tiny room on a mattress on the floor because I hadn't bought a bed frame yet, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked, and I cried for probably 2 hours straight. Not because I regretted it, but because it's strange and heavy to finally get the thing you've wanted for years and realize it doesn't erase all the years before it. Grief and relief can apparently exist in the same moment, which nobody really warns you about. It's been 2 months now. It is genuinely hard in ways I didn't fully expect. Money is tight. I'm juggling more work hours with finishing school online since things got messy with my enrollment when I moved. I've learned how to cook more than the 4 things I used to know, how to budget for groceries, how it feels to be truly alone in a quiet apartment with nobody checking on you, which sounds like freedom and honestly mostly is, but some nights it's also just lonely in a way I wasn't prepared for. My parents have reached out a handful of times since, my dad mostly with anger, still convinced that at some point reality will humble me and I'll come crawling back asking to move in again on his terms. My mom oscillates between guilt trips and, occasionally, something that looks almost like her trying to understand, though it never quite gets there before she circles back to how hurt she is. I've started limiting contact, not cutting them off completely, because despite everything, I don't actually hate them. They're still my parents, and some of the good memories are real too. But I've stopped absorbing every phone call like it's an emergency I have to fix. What surprised me most is how much clearer my own thoughts have become since I left. It's strange to realize how much of my inner voice for years was actually just my mother's voice, or my father's, running commentary on my choices, my worth, what I owed them. Now that I'm not hearing it every day, out loud, at the dinner table, in text messages, I'm slowly starting to hear what I actually think about things, which sounds simple but honestly feels like relearning a language. I'm not writing this looking for people to tell me I did the right thing, though I won't pretend it wouldn't feel nice to hear. I think I'm writing it because for years I felt like I was the only person who saw what was happening in my house, since from the outside it looked completely fine. And I want anyone reading this who recognizes even a little bit of their own life in it to know that it's not normal to feel like you have to earn basic privacy, or that your feelings are always somehow the problem in every disagreement, or that love has to come with that much control attached to it. I don't know exactly how things will look with my parents a year from now or 5 years from now. Um, Maybe there's a version of the future where we repair some of this once enough time has passed and everyone's had space to actually reflect instead of just react. Or maybe this is simply how it stays distant, careful, a relationship held at arm's length for my own sake. Either way, I know that leaving was the first time in a long time I made a decision entirely for myself, without asking permission, without preparing a defense in advance, without needing anyone's approval to feel like it was allowed. And honestly, even on the hard nights, even with the tight budget and the loneliness and the guilt that still creeps in sometimes at 3 in the morning, that feeling alone has made it worth it.